Life doesn't pause when you're sick. Vaccines against respiratory illnesses can help protect you and give you more playtime with your best friend. Depending on age and health status, vaccinations for flu, COVID-19, RSV, or pneumococcal infection may be recommended. Vaccines can help keep you from having a rough time. Learn more at cveep.org/vaccines-protect. Brought to you by the American Lung Association and CVEEP, fighting infectious respiratory disease.
If trauma rewrote the wiring one way, that means safety, relationship, and somatic practices can rewrite it the other way. It is the long game. There is no quick fix. I wish there was, but there's really just adopting some new practices to counter this. And then over time, if you can get these new practices to be what your body goes to and not the other, is the holy grail.
Hey, beautiful soul, and welcome to Dear Body, I'm Listening, the podcast for women navigating chronic symptoms, invisible illness, and that daily dance between hope and exhaustion. If you've ever been told it's all in your head, well, this podcast is for you because your body is not lying and neither are you. Hi, I'm Donna Piper, movement therapist, Pilates instructor, and chronic illness navigator. After years of being dismissed, misdiagnosed, and doing everything quote unquote right, but still getting sicker, I created this space to tell our truth. Here we talk about swelling, brain fog, nervous system crashes, and the kind of symptoms that don't always show up on lab results. We're going to explore lymph, breath, movement, self-trust, latest research, books, relationships, basically everything. All from a place of compassion and honesty. This isn't about fixing your body. It's about finally being heard and getting some answers. Hey friend, running low? Me too. I'm Donna. This is Dear Body, I'm Listening. We're in it together. Hey beautiful soul, welcome back to Dear Body, I'm Listening. This is part 2 of our series on how trauma rewrites pain. Last time, in part 1, we talked about fascia and connective tissue, how trauma literally gets stored in the body, and how those tight, braced tissues keep signaling danger to the brain. Today, we're moving deeper into the autonomic nervous system, the wiring that runs every automatic process in the body, from the heartbeat to digestion. Because here's the thing, most of the illnesses I live with, lipedema, hypermobility EDS, MCAS, POTS, chronic fatigue, are either connective tissue disorders or are deeply influenced by connective tissue and the nervous system. So this episode, we'll talk about how trauma rewires the fight or flight system, how connective tissue and fascia feed into it, and why this connection explains so many of my chronic illness symptoms and maybe yours too. Real talk, no gloss, just us. Now let's dive in. Let me share something that used to confuse the heck out of me. And by the way, I've been doing Pilates for 25 years. I'd recently go to a Pilates class since I have gotten really ill in the last 6 years. In the moment, I can do the moves. I'm good at them. I feel good. Even when I try to pull back, I might challenge myself if the instructor comes over to me and asks me to do more. I've gotten recently in the habit of saying no, but in the beginning, I would challenge myself even more because in the moment it didn't hurt. And because of my hypermobile joints, my Pilates background, and my dancer's background, this did have something in me that wants to push. And my brain would say, you've got this is no problem. But then afterwards, it would be a totally different story. Hours later, or sometimes just in the car ride home, my body would begin to be stiff. My lower back might feel tight. I wasn't getting the same high off of my Pilates. Typically, my Pilates workouts were pretty intense. Again, I had been doing it for a long time, and I had gone into the really advanced moves. And I knew what I was doing, so I could make even really basic classes intense if I wanted to. But now even my heart might race, or I would get these crashes where my I had to lay down. And then I would notice I would feel more bloated, more constipated. My legs would be heavier, inflamed. And again, with that unbearable fatigue. And I kind of felt like my body was going through like a war other than being nourished, because before I would feel nourished by it. I'd feel tired right after, and then I would have a lot of energy and my body would continue to feel good and feel good. So I knew something wasn't right. And I knew I wasn't weak. I knew my body had changed, especially with this weight of this lipedema. So I know Pilates is beneficial. I felt it. So I just had to get some new education about how to move my body, being hypermobile with this extra weight, because I had been used to moving it and dealing with all of my symptoms, which I didn't even know were hypermobile symptoms until recently, until I really started to figure out how to move my body where Pilates is going to be good for me and it's not going to trigger me. And what was really happening with this new batch of symptoms in this active moment of just getting another viral load and another virus last November until I got the diagnosis of chronic fatigue in January and the work I've been doing for it, it's a very slow healing process with chronic fatigue. And that is also impacting all of the hypermobile joints. So this is what's been going on. My connective tissue and my nervous system have been in this trauma loop. My fascia was tightening under the stress of the illnesses and then the movement. And then my autonomic nervous system was misfiring again. I've been stuck in fight and flight for decades, but with these more chronic recent flares and where these conditions have been really setting me back, especially the chronic fatigue, the lipedema as well, and the hypermobility, the POTS, and the MCAS all kind of live in the same group. They all get, in my opinion, in my life, the two major issues are the chronic fatigue and the weight of the lipedema, and that is flaring and interacting with the hypermobility and the MCAS and the POTS in a way that I just didn't know that how amplified these states were. I've been used to healing my body and moving my body from a compromise, quote unquote, because I had all these chronic pain, but I never had knew until recently that I had these other illnesses. So it wasn't weakness. It wasn't something going off of what I was doing. It was that I need to rewire how I view my exercise and what was doing, because it has been rewired. Having these connective tissues issues in this state that I'm in now is just constantly adding fuel to the fire of the fascia and the connective tissue. Now it's time for the connective thread, where the story meets the science. So let's do a quick recap from part 1. So I talked about fascia and that it's a connective tissue web that wraps around every muscle, bone, nerve, and organ. And, I have all these, a part of also the connective tissue issues that are common through my diagnoses are also lymphatic issues, right? So everything's connected. And so when trauma tightens the fascia, because fascia is full of nerve endings, it keeps sending danger signals to my brain. And so with that, with the chronic fatigue, my brain and my central nervous system haven't been working right. There's studies now showing that chronic fatigue isn't something that's just lumped together they can't figure out. It is a neurological issue. There is some things going on with your brain. So, which makes sense after knowing what I know and applying it through my studies as a dance movement psychotherapist who specifically studied post-traumatic stress disorder. And those are the clients that I was with, not on this level, but this was 25 years ago. And, you don't know what you know, right? Isn't that a good saying? So it makes sense that why trauma can literally be felt as stiffness, pain, or heaviness. So let's get into the autonomic nervous system, the ANS for short. The ANS has 2 gears, sympathetic, which is fight, flight, or freeze, and parasympathetic, which is rest, digest, and heal. So in trauma survivors, this balance gets lost. And I've seen it in clients before, and I didn't really see it in myself. when you go to school, if anyone has for any sort of psychology degree, and sometimes I think they teach it just like an introduction, there is this diagram. There's 4 little squares, and one of them is your blind spot. It's hard to be your own healer. You need to be in a relationship so people can point out your blind spot, because literally in this diagram, everyone has it. There is a place that you're not going to be able to see. Even if you know all the information in the world, you need others to help you, right? So that's where this balance that I thought I had, but I couldn't see my own blind spot, was in the sympathetic branch because it was overactive, pumping stress hormones, raising my heart rate, and shutting down my digestion. And I had been told by a lot of other doctors before this that it was maybe a parasite or mold, or they were always trying to go to the root cause. And now I know my root cause is my connective tissue disorders. And this is where this ties the connective tissue disorders together. So let's kind of give a very brief overview. This is not in depth. And I'm sure there's other research with other people that have slightly different or maybe contradictory, but this is from my perspective and my research. So with my hypermobility and EDS, the loose connective tissue is like this. What happens is there's a constant micro injuries happening, and those are producing pain signals. And then my nervous system gets sensitized. And then trauma on top makes the dial louder, right? So then, because when you get desensitized or have a sensitization to something, then it takes more of that stimulant in order to like have those receptors aware of it. That's why I have a really high pain tolerance, probably because of this, but also because I've had migraines since I was 7 years old. So 40 plus years of it has been really adapting my body in a negative way, but in a very healing way, because when we look at the body as always trying to survive and do what it needs to do with what it's given, and the fact that I'm still standing and talking and breathing and doing those things is a huge feat. And so I thank my autonomic nervous system and all my other systems for trying to figure it out. So when we look at POTS, which is another thing that I've had forever, which I didn't really know was a diagnosis, is there's dysautonomia, which means that the autonomic nervous system can't regulate the heart rate or the blood pressure. And so that's why, like sitting to standing and doing things, the heart rate is not in a regular rhythm of things. So if you add the trauma to my fascia, which happens with my connective tissue disorders and the hypermobility, the fight or flight switch gets like stuck even harder. So that's just one other layer that's turning on the fight or flight. Now let's look at our mast cells. So mast cells live in the connective tissue and are triggered by stress. So there is some research that says that initially what happens is when we have any sort of trauma, it actually our bone marrow produces the mast cells, which is interesting. So it's kind of a drawing out. So again, all these things are related. So trauma, again, I define it, I has defined it with my clients when I was a clinician, is any significant distressing event, right? So this mast cell trauma is like my mast cells are out there, like there's danger, that's what they are actually designed for, is the very, very first line of defense. So this trauma of this mast cells thinking like, okay, we're triggered, we're on red alert, it actually is destabilizing these mast cells, which leads to the symptoms of it, whether it's runny nose, gut pain, hives, different sort of skin issues, reactions like with just clothing being touched and she feels uncomfortable. So all of the many, many symptoms that mast cells that you might have because of your mast cell activization and being destabilized. So this again increases that fight and flight. So then let's add, and I'm not even done with all my stuff, right? So let's add the chronic fatigue syndrome. So that is a central sensitization of what happens. So the pain, which really just means is that the pain dial is stuck so high. And then if you add on your post-external malaise, that means that then trauma, any significant distressing event, whether it's internal, like, oh my gosh, I'm sick again, or oh my God, I have a migraine again, or oh my gosh, I went to the doctor and who's dismissive and kind of a jerk about it, or she was. So, like, all of that thing is a stressful event. And my body's already like triple high alert, right? Before I even get to this one. So then trauma lowers the threshold of being able to handle this issues because my body isn't switching back into rest and digest and then coming up with some trauma, like ability to do like a fight and flight response. It's constantly in that heightened state. So then that is the threshold for some crashes and some other things that I'm going to talk on this paper in a couple episodes from now, all about like the more complexities of chronic fatigue. But right now, just looking at like trauma, again, any significant event, how it also impacts the body and the fascial level. So let's turn to the last one that I have is lipedema. So trauma and chronic stress worsen the swelling, the lymph congestion, and the tissue inflammation. So, there is a medical trauma just of being told just lose weight. It's calories in, calories out. Oh, I don't think you have anything. It doesn't look like edema because you don't pit in the legs. They're more swollen. So they really don't know. So trying to fight through all of this. And I'm trying to change the word fight, but to really respond and persevere through all of this is going to be like where it's at, but it also compounds the body's pain response. So all of this also makes the pain of lipedema in your legs even more. So trauma doesn't just quietly sit in the background. It weaves itself through fascia, nerves, immune cells, amplifying the symptoms of every connective tissue that I have, and also heightens the other ones, even if they're not technically a connective tissue condition. And so that's why many of us that have these invisible illnesses carry both trauma and pain. And it's not coincidence, it's biology. So even like going to get surgery, which I am going to do for lipedema, which I have my scheduled 3 appointments in January, April, and July of 2026. That's also trauma. Your body's going through something. It's trying to protect itself. So, and living in this state of hyperarousal does all sorts of things to your body. So that's why it kind of, for me personally, it has ramped up my pain threshold. So that's why when I work out, because I'm flexible, because I know the moves, whatever, I really can put myself into another flare state. Also with chronic fatigue, pushing me past because I don't have a big threshold of energy to use, and it will take me out, even something as simple as doing dishes. Mythbuster. Less hype, more help. Here's the myth. If your tests are normal, the pain must be in your head. Okay, but there's no test for pain. I mean, even the pain scale that we have is kind of hilarious because 10 would be going to the hospital. And I have gone to the hospital for my pain and they can't really figure it out or they don't know. So do I want to sit in the emergency room in incredibly amounts of pain just to be told they don't really know what it is? And so maybe they give me something to put me asleep, but they don't actually address the pain. Because what tests do not measure is fascia tension. They don't measure my nervous system misfires. They are not measuring mast cell chaos or this central sensitization, which I keep on having a hard time pronouncing that because, again, full disclosure, today is a migraine day, but I had a podcast scheduled to do, so that's what's going on. And the last thing I want to say about this myth is your pain is real, right? So a kind of funny thing that goes in the community is like people with chronic illness, like they have a pain scale of like 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, right? Because you're conditioned to have a higher pain threshold because your body has all this trauma response because the fascia is tightened. It's signaling that your body's not safe, so it needs to work harder in order to keep you safe. But I, again, want you to know that your pain is real. Your nervous system is real. It's having a real response, and your connective tissues are part of the story. Feel good flow time, micro moves, macro reliefs. Let's breathe together. So now let's do a grounding exercise for your ANS. So right now, look around your room or wherever you're at, and gently turn your head. Notice 3 things you see: a color, a shape, and an object. So again, these 3 things I want you to see are a color, a shape, and an object. And then I want you to say each one of them to yourself. So describe the color. So it may be blue. The shape might be square. And the object might be your phone or a phone. And now take a deep breath with your hand on your belly and a hand on your heart if that feels comfortable for you. And just whisper to yourself, I am here, I am safe. I am here, I am safe. I am here, I am safe. And this exercise is called orienting. So it tells your nervous system that wherever you currently are, assuming there is no danger around you, that the danger that you might have experienced or are experiencing somewhere, even on a cellular level, that there's no actual physical danger for your bodies to get tense, right? You're safe in this moment. And over time, these micro practices help you retain the ANS to shift out of fight or flight. So doing these things, telling yourself you're safe, does help your central nervous system get new rewiring to help downshift into and switch over to rest and digest. So these little things seem kind of like, oh, well, it's not going to totally change my system. I'm constantly in these processes. But actually, by consciously doing this, you can start to change and put in new input to your system that reads like, okay, so maybe I can downshift for even like 30 seconds into potentially switching over to a rest and digest. This is shared education and lived experience, not medical advice, and is not meant to be. Check in with your body, check in with your clinician, and find out what fits your life. So here's the takeaway from this part 2. Trauma just doesn't live in your fascia. It rewires the autonomic nervous system. And if you live with any connective tissue disorders like hypermobility, EDS, hypermobility spectrum, anything where you're hypermobile, if you have lipedema, which is connective tissue disorder, MCAS comes from the bone marrow and then comes out through the connective tissue. If you have chronic fatigue syndrome, that is when your system is in a state of arousal, your brain isn't really working to your central nervous system, and you have something like POTS, where once you're in a fight or flight, it really does like that regulates your heart rate, so that could impact it. And you just generally have this state of dysautonomia. There's a dysregulation in your system. It's actually amazing that it's working for you, so be grateful. Well, you don't have to. I'm not telling you to be grateful if you don't want to be. But I know, even though some days I don't feel grateful, the fact that I am overloading my system and I'm still able to figure out ways to potentially rewire it, to get it back into a state where it's naturally going into a more rest and digest state and less in the fight or flight. And that's the goal. And on top of this, you may have a lot of different traumatic incidents. Also, medical trauma is a real trauma. Having people not understand you, not feeling good about yourself, if you were bullied, if someone had said something negative about your body or about your energy level, all that stuff could stay in your system that's already doing a lot and is on overdrive, and your fascia could just be, again,
part of the system that is just really trying to help you out, but is overstimulated. So if, trauma rewrote the wiring one way, that means safety, relationship, and somatic practices can rewrite it the other way. It is the long game. There's no quick fix. I wish there was, but there's really just adopting some new practices to counter this. And then over time, if you can get these new practices to be what your body goes to and not the other, is the Holy Grail. So in the next part, in part 3, we're going to be connecting the dots even further of how trauma increases the risk for autoimmune disease and chronic illness. There's lots of papers about this, and why many of us end up carrying both autoimmune and chronic illness if you've had any trauma. So we'll get all into the actual other part of not just how the body deals with trauma, but also when you actually are actively had in the past traumatic events. So if this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who's been told their pain doesn't show up on tests, and follow me at the Donna Piper for more ways to move, heal, and belong in your body. Until next time, remember, your body isn't broken. It's been working overtime to protect you. And now if you can put in any way at all, just telling your body it's safe or you are safe, now that will help a lot. You've been listening to Dear Body, I'm Listening. Now it's time to remember to be gentle with your capacity, meet yourself where you are, and if this has helped, send it to a friend who also needs a soft reminder and a gentle place to land. If this episode made you feel even more seen, brought you clarity, or reminded you that you're not alone, please take a moment to rate, review, and send it to someone who needs that same reminder. You can find more tools, blog posts, and support over at donnapiper.com. And hey, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Got a question for me? Every month I do a listener coaching episode, and I'd love to hear from you. Send your questions, stories, or flare-up confessions to donna@donnapiper.com. And you just might hear your answer on the show. Until next time, dear body, I'm listening, and I am so glad that you are here.